Tensions continue to rise between China and Taiwan over disputed islands in the South China Sea. But if China attacks Taiwan, how would leaders at the Pentagon respond? Timothy Heath is a senior international and defense researcher at the Rand Corporation. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
What does China want from Taiwan?
China believes Taiwan belongs to China. There is an unfinished civil war, and technically speaking, both Taiwan and China claim to represent China. At least that's what the governments say. In reality, of course, Taiwan has governed as a de facto independent country for many years, but Beijing has not given up on its hope to incorporate Taiwan into China.
And how likely is aggressive action towards Taiwan from China?
Well, I think we've seen recently that China is willing to add pressure with intimidation tactics, such as flying large numbers of military aircraft near Taiwan. Routinely, Chinese government officials make threats and warn Taiwan that if it does not come to the bargaining table and take concrete steps towards unification, then Beijing reserves the right to take any action. However, in general, the Chinese are behaving cautiously. They do not want to engage in a war with the United States. So despite the demonstrations and intimidation, they've been very careful about actually initiating any combat.
So what strategic interest does the U.S. have in preventing Chinese action against Taiwan? I mean, what's the big deal for the United States?
Well, the U.S. interest lies in maintaining stability and peace in a part of the world that is important for the U.S. economy. We have major trade partners with China as well as Japan. Taiwan is also a big trade partner, probably in the top 15. And the U.S., if it saw a war break out, could see its economic interest hit dramatically. Moreover, the U.S. has an implied security commitment to Taiwan, and a failure by Washington to help Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack would raise questions about the credibility of U.S. alliance commitments, and that could have follow-on effects around the world.
When you say implied, what do you mean?
The U.S. does not have a formal treaty with Taiwan. The U.S. does not have any kind of security alliance with Taiwan, no formal document that states that that U.S. is obligated to help Taiwan at all. However, the U.S. does have the Taiwan Relations Act, which is a law passed by Congress that obligates the U.S. to help Taiwan defend itself. And so that language is very ambiguous. It doesn't formally commit the U.S., but the reality is, for many years, U.S. has sold arms to Taiwan and provided military advice to Taiwan, and it is well understood around the world and in Beijing that an attack on Taiwan would probably result in U.S. involvement at some level.
So what are the Defense Department's options in deterring China from aggressive action or attacking Taiwan?
It is a difficult problem that has gotten more challenging in recent years due to the fact that the Chinese have built up a massive inventory of anti-ship and anti-air missiles. Any intervention by U.S. military forces could face a serious threat from Chinese military forces. So the Pentagon is developing options. One area of advantage that persists is undersea warfare, that's submarines. The Chinese do not have a good answer for that. So the U.S. could rely on submarines to some extent to help challenge the Chinese Navy. The U.S. is also developing long-range missiles that can be launched farther away from Taiwan and perhaps keep U.S. aircraft safe from Chinese surface-to-air missiles. And then the U.S. is working strategically on building alliances and partnerships with Australia, Japan, and others in the event of a crisis. The U.S. is hoping that a multilateral coalition could persuade the Chinese to back down from escalating into all-out war.
Tim, what can the Pentagon do if China does decide to embark on even some limited aggression towards Taiwan? Is there something that can be done in response that wouldn't risk escalation?
Well, I think diplomacy would be very important in the event of a crisis. If China started to try something more aggressive, but did not want to escalate into total war, a appearance that the U.S. had the support of countries throughout the region in calling for restraint and de-escalation is very important, because Beijing does want to be seen around the world as a respected great power, and Beijing does have ambitions of providing more and more leadership in the Asia Pacific. If instead countries were critical of Chinese belligerence, this might cause Beijing to rethink how far it wanted to go in coercing Taiwan. So I think diplomacy is an important step. Moving military assets closer to the region would be an important deterrent signal as well, because that would warn Beijing that continued belligerence could risk escalation into a broader war with the U.S., which we know Beijing simply doesn't want.
And you mentioned American allies in the Pacific like Japan and Australia. What role would they play, not just in deterrence, but also in a possible response?
Well, Japan, very likely, because the military forces, U.S. military forces that are most likely to intervene in a conflict between China and Taiwan are largely based in Japan, in Okinawa in particular. That's where several large air bases are located. That's where American aircraft would probably operate from. And China knows this, so there's a very high chance that in a fight, China would target those air bases, which means missiles launched against Japan would almost certainly result in Japan getting into the war.
All right. Well, Tim, let's hope that doesn't happen. Thanks so much for being on the program. Appreciate it.
No problem.